Minister, I want to start by welcoming the announcement of the Commission investigation into the mother and baby homes. I think it's important that we finally uncover the whole truth about what went on in those institutions, the circumstances in which women were sent there, the conditions which they and their children had to live in, the high mortality rates, the medical research carried out on children without their parents' consent, and the forced separation of mothers and babies through adoption. It's essential that the Commission investigation consider the role of all bodies as well, not just the orders who ran those homes, but the state agencies that interacted with them, the Department of the Environment, the local authorities that funded them. We have to recall as well that these homes were set up at the instigation of local authorities who wanted people moved from the county homes into separate mother and baby institutions. So I think that all of this needs to be looked at, the role of all the different players that were involved, and we need to uncover the full truth. But moreover, Minister, and I would echo your closing remarks, it's important that we finally see justice for all those affected by this issue, because this isn't just, it's a horrible and dark part of our past, but this is also the daily existence of so many people who went through these homes, mothers who were forced into those homes, who were separated from their children, who have lived with that hurt day in and day out since then, children who've never had the opportunity to track down their parents, and again live with the agony of separation and being denied basic aspects of their identity. And I think it's important that the government's response to this is a wide and comprehensive one, and to me that's not just about realising the truth, but it's also finally doing justice to all of those separated by adoption. And there's been rightly a lot of focus on the last few days on illegal adoption, particularly on cases of illegal birth registrations where we had practices where children were born and GPs or others or solicitors would falsify birth records and deprive that child of their identity from the day of their birth and pretend that they had been born to another family and then sign all of their rights over. And to this day, Minister, the state has always refused to assist those people, saying that, and I've been looking back on recent government replies from the other House as well over the last while when illegal adoptions were raised, saying that it's a private matter. But Minister, I think what finally needs to happen here is that the state would do everything it can to assist those people, to bring together all the records that are there. There are records in GPs' offices and solicitors. There were records found 10 years ago from Nurse Doody, who had a book that was found by her grandson in the attic of the house, where there was a list of 1,000 babies and their birth families had been the only record, I understand, of the truth of those babies and their circumstances and of their natural mother. And there are records like that all over the country. And I think it's important that the government would act now to seize all of that information and bring it together and make it available to families. It should also act to ensure that all information in relation to adoption, whether it was illegal birth registrations or others, when you talk about illegal adoption, I would widen it out in the way that the Adoption Rights Alliance have argued that it's not just about illegal birth registration. That may be the most straightforward occurrence of illegal adoption that we had in the past. But there were also so many cases where women were forced under duress to give up their babies, where they were forced to sign consent forms. Again, the Adoption Rights Alliance have examples of many cases where women signed forms before what was actually the legal limit in the legislation. They were forced to sign forms within 3 or 4 days of giving birth when they were still in shock. They didn't know what was going on, and these forms are put in front of them. So I think it's an absolute fallacy in those circumstances to say that there was anything that could come close to amounting to consent. And the Australian government, Prime Minister Gilliard in Australia, in apologising for illegal adoptions, recognised that, and she said in her apology, she said, "We say sorry to you, the mothers who were denied knowledge of your rights, which meant that you could not provide informed consent. You were given false assurances. You were forced to endure the coercion and brutality of practices that were unethical, dishonest, and in many cases illegal." And she acknowledged that in Australia's history, just as it is in Ireland, adoption was not a free process for many, if not most, of the women who lived through those periods. There was huge pressure put on people. The law was routinely broken in relation to actually having proper consent. But I think it's important that we get to the bottom of all of that and ensure that adopted people are finally given the right to information. The state assists with that in any way possible. I also think it's essential, Minister, to finally bring in a right to information. Other adopted people in other countries across Europe have enjoyed that right for decades. We still don't have it here. As an adopted person, I was lucky to find my mother after 28 years, but the vast majority of adopted people haven't been that lucky in the absence of a right to information. I understand the Taoiseach today said the referendum is required. Conor O'Mahony, who's a constitutional lawyer in UCC, disputed that straight away. I would dispute it. I've read the case that is being referred to, the IOT and B case. I think the government has taken and the previous government, indeed as well, a very conservative reading of that case. And Minister, what I would ask you to do, taking this forward, is not just take advice from the AG on that issue, but actually set up an expert panel akin to what was done with the abortion legislation and bring together legal experts and indeed experts on abortion, on adoption and the right to information from other countries, and set up a process to make recommendations on taking that issue forward, because this is such an important issue to the thousands of mothers and children throughout Ireland who have been separated, whether it was through illegal adoptions or through any form of adoption. Minister, it's hard to explain to anybody not affected by the issue what it's like not to know the basics of who you are, where you came from, where your mother is, if she's okay, if she's happy, how her life has turned out, those basic things that everybody else takes for granted. And I think this issue has been denied for too long, and I hope that you're the Minister that will finally do something about it. Thank you.
Senator Henry.